On your Thursday episode of Locked On Raptors, Brandon Ingram is a Toronto Raptor. How do I feel about it? Well, that's a bit of a moving target.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, February the 6th. It is trade deadline day, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms, and I've never once been this torn about a Toronto Raptors trade. You can find all of my work over on Blue Sky. You can, of course, find the show on Instagram as well, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, which is popping the hell off right now. Go to the link in the description of the podcast. Come hang out, talk about the trade, talk about future trades to come, all that good stuff. It's a wonderful community we got building around the show. You can also, of course, subscribe to the daily free Locked On Raptors newsletter. QR code on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. You can go to the link in the description of the podcast as well. If you're listening, put your email in the bar, and you will get the Locked On Raptors newsletter to your inbox 5 days a week for the low, low price of On the House. I will have some words about Brandon Ingram later on today. Whew. All right, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And we'll get started here on a big fat trade reaction episode of the podcast. Yes, the Toronto Raptors have traded for Brandon Ingram of the New Orleans Pelicans. It was rumored heavily over the last couple of weeks. I never really thought it was going to get to the finish line because I think there were a lot of reasons why it didn't make a lot of sense for the Raptors. But we know the Raptors, they're going to do stuff that maybe Bucks convention that is a little unorthodox, and this certainly fits the bill. The cost to acquire Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, the Pacers' first-round pick next season in 2026, and a second-round pick in 2031. They hang on to that valuable Blazers pick they have in the second round this year. We're going to get into why this could work, how this will fail, if it's going to, and all of that. But we should just kind of get to the tail of the tape of the trade right now, and I think kind of sort out the rationale. And this is the thing that's kind of got me going back and forth on this trade. I slept on it last night. I was not super thrilled last night when I went to bed. Woke up a little more accepting of it, but I still think there are reasons to be kind of concerned or curious or uneasy about what's to come here in the next steps for the Raptors after this trade. But, a couple important things to note with this one. Number one, this closes the loop on the Pascal Siakam trade. Essentially, you're looking at Pascal Siakam for Brandon Ingram, Jacoby Walter, who the Raptors took with the 19th overall pick they got in the Siakam trade, and Ochai Agbaji, who the Raptors acquired with the other pick they got in that trade, the 29th pick that ended up going to the Jazz, where they picked Isaiah Collier last year. So you look at it in the whole, like, that's, I think, a pretty all right way to look at it as far as asset management goes. You turn Pascal Siakam, a couple years older than Brandon Ingram. I'd say a better player than Brandon Ingram, and certainly more durable than Brandon Ingram, but you turn him into Brandon Ingram, a guy with all-star upside, and you bring in Ochai Agbaji and Jacoby Walter as well. The pure cost to acquire here, pretty low. And that, I think, is the reason why Brandon Ingram is on the Toronto Raptors right now. I think there's all this sort of, hand-wringing or concern about, well, what does this do for the Raptors' direction, their plan? Their plan has and always will be stay flexible, be opportunistic above all. Even though they're in a rebuild, and we'll get into why I don't think this changes course for this season at all. But even though they're in a quote-unquote rebuild, they've pounded that terminology all season long. This is a franchise, this is a front office that is always poking around, looking for guys to trade for, looking for ways to upgrade. Masai Ujiri has been a very good trader over the course of his career, dating back even to Denver. Like, this is a guy who knows how to make trades, knows how to win trades. And this is a thing they've always done. If you can get a guy for a low cost of acquisition, it's worth the headaches and questions that might come with it. I think there are a lot of headaches and questions that come with this one. We'll get into those, but I get the rationale here for sure. The idea here is you bring in Brandon Ingram, who, again, former All-Star back in 2019-20. He is a very good scorer, the best scorer that they've had on this team in quite some time. He brings to the table, some pick and roll craft. He obviously can go and get his own shot when the chips are down. He helps cover for some of the stuff that I think we've learned this year that Scottie Barnes is maybe not so great at. I think there are fit concerns. We'll get into that in terms of, ways in which this doesn't work out and ways it can work. But as far as just getting pure talent on the team, I understand this is what the Raptors do. And I don't think it derails their plan at large for this season, right? Brandon Ingram's been hurt. He's been out since December the 7th with an ankle sprain. Doesn't seem like he's any close to returning. And it feels like the Raptors are probably just going to let him sit this one out, or at the very most, like, get him into a handful of games down the stretch here just to see what they've got. I mean, I'd like to see what they've got, but I also think they're pretty, obviously angling towards the draft. They've used that terminology all year. The rebuild, the draft is important to us. Development. They're playing the rookies a lot right now. Like, this is the path I think they're still going to be on, even though Ingram is here. This is not a trade that in any way resembles the Jakob Poeltl trade of a couple years ago in spirit. I know that's kind of on the surface. Well, this tanking bad team trades a first-round pick for a win-now guy. Like, what's that about? Are they going to push for the play-in? I don't think that's what's happening here. I think this is about getting Brandon Ingram in the door and using this as sort of their off-season acquisition, which they've done in the past. They've been pretty good at this. Serge Ibaka back in the day. They did this with Jakob Poeltl. They've done this before where they trade for a guy they want and then they keep him around. They did it with Kelly Olynyk just a year ago and used Kelly Olynyk to go trade for Brandon Ingram. This is a thing that the Raptors do that I think defies convention a little bit and kind of puzzles people. But again, this is not the Raptors making a push for the play-in this year. This is them getting a guy in the door who addresses the talent, who addresses some of the shot creation issues this team has. I mean, the defense has been great of late. The offense has been kind of butt for the Raptors over the last little while. And it's because they don't have a ton of organic shot creation, right? It's Scottie Barnes sometimes, it's Emmanuel Quickley sometimes, and beyond that, it's pretty tough to just have looks created from nothing. So much is dependent upon their system, which their system is pretty good at. They have a very good shot profile. They get to the rim a ton. Like, they get good looks out of what they do, but sometimes you just need a dude who can go get a bucket. And Brandon Ingram is that if he's healthy, which is the big thing that hangs over all of this. His health and whatever they're going to pay him are the two things that are really going to inform what this trade ends up looking like, right? I think this is the thing that drives me nuts with this trade, is because, like, on this show, I am constantly preaching the concept of, like, you don't need to just tank. That's like not the only way to go and procure talent and be good, right? That's one way, but the other way is just, take what you have, turn a couple of beans into a house over time, right? It's the slow, trading of assets and improving, putting yourself in a position to be good, have a lot of good players. The Raptors now have a lot of good players, right? Like, Brandon Ingram at full health is a very good player. Scottie Barnes, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Jakob Poeltl, Grady Dick, Jacoby Walter one day maybe, Jamal Shed one day maybe, Ochai Agbaji. Like, they have themselves 7, 8, 9, 10 guys going into next season that you feel pretty good about getting NBA minutes, and that's before they even use their pick in this year's draft, which, by the way, is going to be pretty high pick, and we'll get into how that could help usher things along here, depending on how the draft lottery goes and who they get in the draft this year to amplify and bolster this whole thing. But again, the sort of concept of trading to improve just because you can, I've always been a fan of that. I think just getting good players is a good thing to do. Masai Ujiri, this has always been his MO. Think of back to Denver. Those teams were just collections of pretty good players who won 50 games. Like, you can get a long way. This was the thing with the Kyle and DeMar teams too, with the post-championship team in 2019-20. If you get a lot of good players, it can overcome not having maybe super high-end talent, and you can still be a very good team. And I think that's what the goal has to be. I know this maybe isn't a deal that you look at and say, well, this team now has championship upside. Guess what? Very few teams do. The actual goal to me in the era of parity should be build a regular, perennial playoff team and hope that can then be parlayed into something better. And I think there's a world in which this does happen from the Brandon Ingram trade for the Raptors. Again, lots of good players. If things break right, if they get the health that they'll need, if Ingram gets a contract that's not too bloated, there's a world in which all the outcomes that come out of this are good, right? Like, this can end very well for the Raptors and kickstart a really fun era of basketball. There's also a lot of downsides with the health and the contractual situation and the way the books are set up in this NBA, where, like, having flexible, fungible books is a pretty important thing. You don't want to be too bogged down with bloated contracts that limit your flexibility, limit your upside, all of that. That's all in consideration here as well. Ultimately, I'm at like a 5.5 out of 10 on this one. I was probably a 4 out of 10 last night. I think there's worlds in which this works out, and I get the logic of it. I don't think this is them kind of bucking some plan. This was always the plan, I think. And this is the plan I suggested they should try to follow, which is, 1 year in the tank, sure, but this team's too far along in terms of their contracts, in terms of the guys they have on the team already, to be doing a prolonged 2, 3, 4 year tank. This isn't the Wizards. They're way ahead of that. And I thought expediting the process by getting a good player in the door was probably a good idea. I think my concern is that Brandon Ingram, I'm kind of unsure if he's the right player. We will get into how this works. How could he be the right player? How does this all make sense for the Raptors? Coming up in just a second. Later on, we'll, of course, get into how this fails as well, because, man, the range of outcomes here, extremely wide. We'll go optimistic to start off, coming up in just 1 second here. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Basketball season's heating up, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in award winnings, Prize Picks makes it easy and fun to turn your sports knowledge into real money. It's the way it should be with daily fantasy. It's not you against some shadow expert in a basement with an impossible-to-beat lineup who's done all the algorithms and knows exactly who's going to win on each day. No, it's just you against your own ability to predict more or less on certain stat categories for players. It's that simple. Think Luka Doncic, once he returns for the Lakers, is going to be putting up lots of points. Take them more, especially if he's playing the Dallas Mavericks. You think Brandon Ingram, when he plays for the Toronto Raptors, is going to be putting up buckets. Take them more there as well. Always fun to take them more and hope for the best, especially if it's guys you're rooting for. Plus, their Taco Tuesday promo gives you discounted player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDINNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's LOCKEDINNBA for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Back at it here. Raptors. Brandon Ingram for Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, the Pacers first next year, and the second rounder for 2031. It's a big one. It's a doozy. It's a weird one. I'm noodling on it. I'm going to be noodling on it for many, many years to come. And I think we still have to see what the contract ends up being and sort of how they sort it all out on the books to fully know like how we're all going to feel about this. Honestly, like, again, the range of outcomes here is pretty wide, and they're still to be determined, with the contract making a pretty significant contribution to pushing me one way or another. But let's get into how this works out for the Raptors, right? Again, the way this makes sense, the way this works is Brandon Ingram comes in and offers a release valve, just like a softening of the offensive burden that sits upon Scottie Barnes' shoulders right now. We've seen it. It's been tough for him. We've seen it of late. Last night against the Grizzlies, earlier this week in their last game against the Knicks on Tuesday. Over the course of the last little while, even though Scottie Barnes has been driving incredibly positive play for the most part when he's played, the offense has been a struggle. The threes aren't falling. And the two-point shot, like I believe in the mid-range big time. I think he's maybe got a little mid-range happy. He's a little rim-averse at the moment. But I think we've seen that he's just not going to be the guy who can guide a very good offense as the number one creator. I think there, again, there's worlds in which he, is part of pretty good offenses as like a lead guy, depending on the fit around him and all of that. But bringing in Brandon Ingram just kind of gives you a cheat code for offensive creation that you don't have right now. And look, he is not like, if your issue with Scottie Barnes is that he can't be the number one on a very good offense, Brandon Ingram probably also can't be the number one on a very good offense. Like, this is kind of proven over the years, but it's sort of an amplifying effect, right? You get Ingram in there and Scottie Barnes, a lot of talent between both of those guys. We'll see about the fit. Again, I'm a little concerned about the fit, but the way this works is Brandon Ingram adapts his game a little bit. Scottie Barnes adapts his game a little bit too. And you just have a lot of really good players. Emmanuel quickly flying around off of those two guys, both on and off the ball. Jitterbug energy with off-ball threes. And then, kind of running some stuff here and there with, maybe pick and roll with Jakob Poeltl while you have Barnes and Ingram and RJ Barrett ready to attack closeouts off of kicks. Like, there's a way in which this machine really runs. And I am a big believer in Darko Rajakovic. Like, I think this is like, there's a lot on Darko Rajakovic right now to make this thing work, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he seems to have a knack for putting guys in a position to succeed. RJ Barrett being exhibit A, right? Had this sort of clunky style of play with the New York Knicks, comes to the Raptors, streamlines entirely, cuts out the fat. He's a on the catch, downhill, barreling monster towards the rim. He doesn't hold the ball too long, not super high touch time. He's just a really good play finisher, eager catch and shoot 3-point guy, even if he's not the greatest catch and shoot 3-point guy, but he's eager to take him. He'll have heaters. That's great. Like, they found a way to optimize RJ Barrett, which I don't think many Knicks fans really thought was possible after his time playing with the New York Knicks, or anyone who would watch the Knicks thought was possible. They found a way to make RJ Barrett a really effective, efficient offensive player, at least. Grady Dick has been put in really nice positions to succeed since he came into the league. Scottie Barnes, even, like, I think Darko's been pretty, willing to adapt how he's deployed to optimize what he does well. Again, I don't think the supporting cast necessarily has helped a lot in terms of ushering Scottie along. He's limited as the number one guy. But overall, like, Darko has a track record here of putting guys in positions to succeed and getting buy-in, number one. Like, this team buys in and believes to what Darko Rajakovic is selling, right? Like, and if Brandon Ingram comes in, he's excited about the opportunity, apparently, per Shams Charania. Like, there's a world in which they get him to be more of a catch-and-shoot happy guy, right? This is the biggest concern with Ingram, is he's been kind of like an ISO jab step mid-range merchant type guy. And he's good at it, and there's a place for that. Clutch games, you just need a bucket out of nothing. There's a place for that for sure, as like a break glass in case of emergency thing. But you also are going to need him in this offense where there's not like a ton of spacing. Scottie's not a great shooter. RJ's a fine shooter that teams don't really care about. Quickly's a really good shooter. Ingram can be a really good shooter. Pirtle's not a shooter. Like, there's not a ton of space here. And so just volume-wise and tilting the defense-wise, Ingram's going to have to be a very eager three-point shooter. Throughout his career, it's been kind of up and down, right? He, going back through his career logs, anywhere between 2.5 and 4 catch-and-shoot attempts a game is kind of where he's landed. Last year in particular was at 2.5. He shot 37% last year on those. It's got to be more than that. This year's numbers are weird. He's only played 18 games. The Pelicans were an injured disaster when he played. I'm kind of not looking at his numbers that much this year. But last year, he's got to take more threes. He's got to take more threes from the corner. He's got to space a little bit. He's got to be able to drive from the corner and make things happen there. Like, he's got to adapt his game a little bit here for sure. I think, again, though, Scottie Barnes is going to have to adapt as well. I think Scottie Barnes needs to find more rim shots in his diet. There's no doubt about it. And I do think there's a way in which Brandon Ingram helps him do that. I think Ingram-Barnes pick and roll, as much as you can kind of easily switch that because they're similarly sized guys. I think the size you're dealing with there, the passing chops between the two of them, the finishing of Scottie Barnes on the roll, there's some interesting stuff to try to weaponize there. And not every team is going to have multiple guys to guard both of those two dudes with 6'9", like-sized defenders. And so maybe those switching situations aren't as common, or you can find ways around them. Again, there's lots of interesting stuff they can do within this offense if Brandon Ingram is willing to adapt, if Scottie Barnes is willing to adapt. Let me just show you here. I have a bit of a representation. I've kind of shared this around on socials as well. If you're not watching on YouTube, I'll do my best to explain. But these are the shot charts of Brandon Ingram and Scottie Barnes from this year, Brandon Ingram from last year when he played 64 games, I think it was. Scottie Barnes, Brandon Ingram, both of these guys take a lot of above the break threes, and they live in the sort of the high paint. They, Barnes a little more at the rim than Ingram, but very similar areas here. The short mid-range, both of these guys love to operate within. Those are not shot charts that scream coexistence to me. There's going to have to be some give and take. Scottie's going to have to cut out the above the break threes, I think. Ingram's going to have to take more corner threes. Scottie's going to have to shoot more at the rim. That's all going to have happen here. But if it works, if it comes together, you can have a pretty nice offense here. Brandon Ingram's a very good three-point shooter. He is been anywhere between 37 and 42% on catch and shoots throughout his career. He's got a little pull-up juice as well. He might be the best pull-up shooter on the team. Emmanuel Quickley's right in there as well, but he's a very good pull-up shooter for, it's a tough shot, but he's, low to mid 30s on pull-ups. That's an all right place to start from. He's been a pretty good pick and roll ball handler. Like, that is going to fit well into what the Raptors do. They like to run a lot of pick and roll, or the sort of dribble handoff stuff that resembles pick and roll, but isn't quite technically pick and roll. Over the last many years, Ingram anywhere between the top 25 and 35% when it comes to pick and roll efficiency as a ball handler. And that's just the NBA.com tracking data that only encompasses his shots. It doesn't bake in passing, and he's a pretty good passer. I got to get someone to pull the synergy numbers for me on sort of what the overall impact has been for him in pick and roll after passes are baked in as well. But scoring wise, he can do it. And if you can, again, realign these shot charts a little bit, have Brandon Ingram be a more willing three-point shooter just to get that three-point volume up, take advantage of the fact that he's basically a dead-eye three-point shooter when he does it off the catch. again, there's all sorts of ways this offense can commingle, right? You can run dribble handoff with Ingram and Jakob Poeltl while you have Barrett and quickly off the ball and Scottie in the dunker spot, or, move Scottie into the screening position, Yak in the dunker spot. Like, they can run all kinds of different pick and roll combinations. Barrett Poeltl has been really good. Ingram Poeltl, I think, will be pretty good. Quickly Poeltl has a lot of juice. You can run the inverted stuff with Barnes and quickly Barnes. Like, there's lots of ways to go and create stuff in this offense now. And it's, again, an amplifying effect. The more good creative types you have, the more you're going to be able to kind of layer over the course of a full possession a lot of different actions that can produce good stuff for you. I think there's a lot of juice to be squeezed out of this offense. And on defense, it can work. I think it can work because Scottie Barnes is a monster and he's proven he can just give a floor to a defense. And look, I'm not a huge fan of Brandon Ingram's defense. I think he is, he's long and that's kind of it, but he is long. He's enormous, right? A 6'9" guy with his wingspan next to Scottie Barnes, next to Jakob Poeltl. That's a lot of dude in the lane, blocking up space, poking passing lanes, things like that. I think there's a way it works. And, could they do better than Ingram Barrett on the wings defensively? Certainly. Could they do better than Ingram Grady Dick? 100%. It's not perfect, but I do think Scottie Barnes offers a floor, and the length that Brandon Ingram provides, like the Pelicans have had good defenses with Brandon Ingram on the team. He doesn't make it so it's a disqualifying thing that you can't play good defense with him. And so that's a way in which this can work. The defense kind of gets a little extra bolster of length, which, again, this is not a team with a lot of long guys. He's like another 6'9" guy, which is very useful if you're trying to play defense and just be everywhere. Scottie Barnes cleaning up messes at the back. We've seen what a monster he can be there. That can work. There's a world in which this team approaches top 10 offense and pretty good defense as well. I don't know, top 10 on both ends means you're a very good team. Do I think they're a very good team? I think that's an outcome for sure. The way this all works out, the high-end outcome is, damn, they're pretty good. So you cross your fingers and hope they get there. I also think a thing that really bolsters this whole thing is the draft lottery. They have the top 5 odds right now. I think they're 5th in the odds after last night's loss. If they jump up and they get themselves a Dylan Harper, a Cooper Flagg, an Ace Bailey, whoever it might be, that's a cheap, really good player probably on a rookie contract to kind of help ease the financial stress that having all these big expensive guys is going to mean. And that can really be a way to propel this thing forward. If they get Dylan Harper, talk about creation, man. That's a big deal. That's huge. If they get Ace Bailey, welcome to Vision 6'9" again, baby. Vision 6'9" 2.0. This time it's really expensive, but it might be really good. We'll see. It's again, there are ways this works. If Jacoby Walter pops, that's a big thing. If Grady Dick pops, there could be real bench juice on this team with Ochai Agbaji being so dependable and Jonathan Mobo showing signs and Jamal Shed showing signs. Again, Masai's done this before, just assembling a team of a lot of really good players and hoping it all works. The upside here is this team is a 50-plus win team as early as next year, frankly. And they're a perennial top 6 Eastern Conference team, and we get a really fun era of Raptors basketball out of this. That's the upside. The downside, there are lots of ways to get there, and it could be kind of a mess if things don't gel. We'll get into what that looks like, where the contract sits in all of this, and all that coming up to close things out in just a sec. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Look, maybe you're at a Super Bowl party, you want to hang out with some friends, and you want to make some bets. What a great way to do it by going over to the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Just bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, wrapping it up here with thoughts on how this doesn't work out. The stuff that's got me feeling queasy. Because again, a lot of the logic of this trade is stuff that I have championed on this very podcast for years. You don't need to only tank and do multi-year rebuilds and lottery plays. You can just go get good players and hope that turns you into something better. And again, I think there's a possibility this team becomes like a sum of its parts, like greater than the sum of its parts type of team, where they don't have necessarily like a top 10 talent, but they have a lot of really good players, and that makes them a regular season wins machine. That is very much on the table for this team. Again, it's going to require Darko Rajakovic magic and guys being willing to adapt, but I'm all right to be optimistic on that front. The stuff that gives me pause, first of all, it's the health. I'm concerned about the health with Brandon Ingram, and I'm sorry if that makes me like a concern troll, but this is a guy who's not played a lot of basketball, relatively speaking, over the years. He's played just 18 games this season with the ankle injury. Before that, 64 games. Before that, 45 games. Before that, 55, 61, 62, 52, 59. He hasn't played more than 64 games since his rookie season back in 2016-17, where he played 79. He's been injured a lot. He's like a very like skinny, large man. It seems like he's just maybe prone to getting hurt. And that's a concern in a cap environment where having a guy, ask Brandon Ingram's old team what it's like having a guy on your team who makes a lot of money, who is hard to plan for because the injury thing happens all the time. The Pelicans are in disarray precisely because of this, mostly because of Zion, but Brandon Ingram's part of that too. He's just not played a lot of basketball. If you go back over the course of his career, since 2016-17, he's played 36 more basketball games than Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, a guy who has had multiple cataclysmic injuries, missed an entire season with an Achilles, and was older at the time Ingram came into the league than Ingram is now. Like, he's played just about as much basketball on a per season basis as Kevin Durant since 2016-17. That's a little concerning. That's a little alarming. And if this works out that Ingram can't stay healthy, if he's not healthy for the times that matter most, look, guys are going to miss 15, 20 games. It's part of the deal. But if it bleeds into the postseason, if it bleeds into games that really matter, the Raptors can't get off the starting lines because he's unhealthy coming into seasons. Like, we've seen the effect of Emmanuel Quickley being hurt this year. A guy who makes $32.5 million not being available. It's really tough to square in this modern NBA. And look, I am not someone who thinks the Quickley contract is bad yet. It certainly doesn't look as good as I thought it was last summer. There's no doubt. And I've opened up my possibility, like my world, to the possibility that it could be bad. And if that's the case, and you have Quickley as a not very desirable contract, and Brandon Ingram making more than him most likely, and him being hurt, all of a sudden, we're looking at some pretty dire stuff and might be in the beginnings of what eventually becomes a slow divorce with Scottie Barnes over the course of the next 3-4 years. Again, that's getting way ahead of ourselves, but that's the downside here. The downside is that this trade kind of nukes this era. This is day one of the end of the Scottie Barnes era, and they're right back trying to rebuild in 3-4 years' time when Scottie Barnes has asked for a trade because the team just can't get out of its own way. Again, I don't think that's necessarily the most likely outcome here, but it's on the table, and it's why it gives me pause. A lot of this is going to come down to what Brandon Ingram makes on his next deal. Right now, the Raptors can offer him a 3-year, $144 million extension. That seems rich for me. $48 million a year for Brandon Ingram, considering there's not a whole lot of leverage that he has in the market right now. What's he going to do? Walk to the Wizards? Walk to the Nets? I have my doubts there. I think if the Pistons wanted him, they might have traded for him and got his bird rights in the door. Those are the teams with cap space. Obviously, signing trades can be a thing. I'm not super concerned about some other team coming in with a Godfather offer for Brandon Ingram, but it's certainly going to be a threat until it's not. You have to weigh that in your mind here. But again, like, there should be a way the Raptors can negotiate a more team-friendly deal here. But based on their track record, like, I don't know, they didn't really do that with Emmanuel Quickley. They weren't really bidding against anybody with Quickley, and they gave him $32.5 million a year, up to 35 with incentives. Again, I think that deal will age fine. It hasn't looked good in the first year. There's no doubt. If you can't stay healthy, it's a really bad deal. But they didn't exactly, cover themselves in glory with that negotiation. With Ingram, like, it's going to be tough, right? Like, if they're trying to thread the needle here and they're trying to avoid having to move RJ Barrett this summer, which could be a thing if they pay Ingram too much, like, there's a way they can thread the needle, but it gets pretty tricky. Our pal Daniel Hackett, from my former colleague over at Raptors HQ, a wonderful essential follow over on Raptors Blue Sky. D Hackett 1565. I was talking to him a little bit this morning about the cap minutia because he's the cap wizard. He's the guy I go to when I have cap questions. Basically, this can work for the Raptors, but they don't really have to move any other salary. Moving off Kelly Olynyk really helps matters here. that $13 million for next year being off the books is a big deal when it comes to making all of this fit this summer. But the Raptors can essentially, if they want to wait till the summer and offer Ingram like a full 5-year contract, they can basically offer him a deal that works out to about $38 million a year that starts at 34.5 and duck the tax for next year and just have quickly RJ, Ingram, Scottie, Pirtle, Grady, Ochai, Walter, Shed, Mobo be kind of their 10. Plus whoever they draft, obviously. He'll be the 11th guy. Jamison Battle's in there. Albert Shamshay's around. We'll see how this all works. Maybe Orlando Robinson gets a contract for a minimum or something like that, or some similar type backup big. If that's the case and they can make it work without moving other guys, like I'm at least down to give it a shot. Again, I think the fit could be weird. Barrett, Ingram, Scottie, like I don't think there's actually a ton of overlap in terms of like guys needing the ball too much. Barrett's a play finisher. He doesn't really hold the ball that much. Quickly can be a play finisher for you if you need him to be. There's a world in which this works again, but there's also a world in which the overlap doesn't kind of happen. There's too much toe stepping with Ingram and Barnes. Ingram's making a lot of money. Maybe he's hurt. Quickly also maybe doesn't quite match the value of his contract. And you're looking at a lot of bloat for a team with like a 43-win upside. That's the sort of downside of this year, right? Obviously, if multiple guys are hurt, then the downside's far lower than just 43 wins. But that is sort of the way this kind of stagnates and doesn't work out. Again, the downside here is you've made the Rudy Gay trade again and created overlapping janky fits where guys aren't amplifying each other and they're stepping on each other's toes, and it's diminishing returns when they're together, and you're at your best when they're not playing together. That's not what you want about your two most expensive players in Barnes and Ingram, for sure. Like, you need them to be able to mesh and play with one another. And again, give Darko Rajakovic room to cook. Maybe he can pull that off. The downside, again, it's the Rudy Gay comp comes to mind. It's also like the wing version of Jermaine O'Neal plus Chris Bosh. That was horrible. The downside is that this is a Brian Colangelo level disaster that kind of nukes the next few years of this team. That is how this goes wrong. Where do I come down? And again, I've moved to slight positive, 5.5 out of 10, very on the fence. I need to see what the contract's going to be before I really know how I feel about this. Maybe they get an extension done by the end of today. And when I talk to you later with an episode post deadline, we're talking about Brandon Ingram on a nice team-friendly extension, and I'm feeling a whole lot better about things. But until we know what that number is going to be, I'm going to have some pause. I will have some more thoughts on this, surely, later on today. I'm going to try to link up with Jake Madison from Locked On Pelicans to have a little chat. We will have a second episode on this and the rest of the trade deadline after the deadline today. You'll also have a newsletter post from me a little bit later on, too. Please go subscribe. QR code on the screen. You can go and check it out there. Link in the description of the podcast for the Discord if you want to join and come talk about the trade today. Lots of chatter going on in there, baby. Again, follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. It's a doozy, man. We're going to be thinking about this one for a while. There's lots of ways in which this goes well and or poorly for your Toronto Raptors. We'll just have to wait and see. And it might be a while until we actually see Ingram play for the Raptors, which is another fun, interesting, maybe not fun wrinkle to this. We'll see. Either way, we'll have more later. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Hope that's not a future look at the future of Brandon Ingram.